this was never on any kind of a label. It was completely DIY. And I was doing this, I guess, ahead of my time. I did a couple of albums like this. They were self-produced, self-manufactured, and available on my website. So this album has never had a so-called commercial CD or vinyl release. So I'm pretty excited to have it, and it's been beautifully remastered. So I'm very excited about it now being available. It's interesting because some of the people I talked to about what should I do next, because Circle did Sacrificial Cake, which is a very experimental, psychedelic kind of an album, and this has more deliberately kind of poppy kind of things on it, as well as kind of scary things on it.
Yes,
but this was. Some of my friends were like, well, this is, your most accessible of everything you've ever done.
Your music has followed me around various parts of the world. Even when I was in Czech Republic, this is just a very quick digression before we get into the interview. There was an exhibition in Prague of music during communist times, and they had various flyers from shows that occurred during the time of the Iron Curtain. And one of the flyers they had there was a show that you played with Swans in Brno. I think it was in 1987.
Right.
So
I remember that. Yeah, I remember that show. Sure.
So it's pretty wild. They had like videos of Tina Turner and Depeche Mode mentioned, and then there was you and Swans. And I thought, there you go. The people that actually made the effort to go further east during those times. Pretty wild, I'm sure.
Yeah, that was really an incredibly enlightening experience to go. Yeah, I remember all of that so vividly. And a lot of people put their lives on the line for us because we were kind of, illegally there, unauthorized there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And rolling into Prague was quite an experience. And we had a sound man, Jack Balchin, who managed to talk his way to get us through the border. And I'll never forget rolling in there and seeing the flags on the buildings. And we were kind of shuttled around, different people that were helping us. And these are people, they were academics, but they had been kind of blacklisted. So they were street cleaners, but they were, PhDs. So it was, yeah. And then we did a show. It was an underground show in a cellar. That was very interesting in Prague. But yeah, that whole experience was unbelievable. Of course, it was Yugoslavia before it became Slovenia. And it was really an enlightening time for me. And, going along with that, I was a hardcore, basically a vegan. And so, there was really nothing for me to eat or drink. I drank orange soda pop, and I got really ill at the end of that tour because, the guys were eating sausages and potatoes and stuff. And I was eating basically just the potatoes. And then we played this place. It was a hotel at one time on the beach. It was quite beautiful. And there was no one there. We ate in this formal dining room, and I remember they had lesueur, like canned peas, on the menu. I was very excited to have those because I was really longing for fruits and vegetables.
Yeah, I think when I lived in Prague, which wasn't so long ago, they had definitely made things more adjusted towards people that had, various different dietary requirements. But I can imagine that back in the day, there was a lot of meat and not so much vegetable.
Yeah, I got really ill. I got pneumonia. It was quite interesting. We were just talking about this recently when I saw Michael, when Swans played here in Atlanta. They played, and I went to the show just basically to see the guys that I knew more than anything else. And we were talking about that tour. And we also talked about it in Berlin when I played the same venue as Michael in 2022. We were talking about all and he had gone vegan, and I said, well, remember when I was doing that and touring and I got really ill? He said, yeah, you got pneumonia. I was like, well, you have to now I've learned to kind of go with the flow. So when I do concerts now, I say, what is regional? What's available here now? And that's, I don't ask for anything that makes anyone stressed out.
So, adapt to your environment.
Yes, exactly. And that's the way it should be. Yeah.
Now, Jarboe, before I continue this any further, I'd better do a very quick introduction, and then we can get into it. So this is Tom for Ghost Cult, and it is a personal pleasure for me to introduce our guest today. She first came to prominence in the 80s and 90s playing on some of the most iconic of Swans albums like Children of God and White Light from the Mouth of Infinity. And from the mid-90s, she has had a rich, varied, and prolific career as a solo artist. I like to think that I'm quite familiar with a reasonable amount of her work, but I believe there's about 50 solo records, give or take. And we are particularly here today to talk about Disburden Disciple, which is getting a 25-year anniversary reissue through the Circle Music, originally released in 2000 and coming out on vinyl for the first time, double vinyl, in fact, double orange or red vinyl, I believe. And with all of that introduction, my guest is Jarboe. Jarboe, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I will add that this was never on any kind of a label. It was completely DIY. And I was doing this, I guess, ahead of my time. I did a couple of albums like this. They were self-produced, self-manufactured, and available on my website. So this album has never had a so-called commercial CD or vinyl release. So I'm pretty excited to have it. And it's been beautifully remastered. So I'm very excited about it now being available. And it's interesting because some of the people I talked to about what should I do next, because, Circle did Sacrificial Cake, which is a very experimental, psychedelic kind of an album. And this has more deliberately kind of poppy kind of things on it, as well as kind of scary things on it.
Yes.
But this was... some of my friends were like, well, this is, your most accessible of everything you've ever done. So I guess, although this also has a backstory of a lot of intensity to it, which is why it's called Disburden Disciple. And when I went to Israel to record, and I at one time was living inside Damascus Gate in Jerusalem. And anyway, long story short, I got in, and I was at the wrong place at the wrong time, and there was a conflict, and I got hurt. And so I recorded a lot of sounds when I was there, environmental sounds. So I think that kind of comes full circle with the track Pure War, which basically is about the war of the heart more than anything else, although it does have the sound of rolling tanks and that kind of thing going on. So the disburden is in the theme of every song is a type of seeking to unburden one of some kind of either psychological or physical intensity. So Pure War was the whole album was ultimately coming full circle of recovering from that incident. And they had a concert in New York to raise money for surgery and all this stuff. So it was a very intense experience, all of it.
Oh, that's fascinating. I had no idea about that the physical trauma that was attached to the album. I wanted to share some of my feelings about the album and my interpretations of the album and find out from you whether my take on it resonates with you, or if this sort of like coincides or corresponds with your feelings about the album, or how it was when you made it. So, and I may be wide of the mark, but you can tell me if I am. So I feel like your previous album, Anhedoniac, is one of your most intense and harrowing and distressing albums, which is perhaps not surprising given the time that it was made. And I feel like, I mean, it's also one of my favorite albums of yours. Going from that time into Disburden Disciple, to your point that it has some of your poppier music on it, but definitely it's not all poppy. And I feel there's a little bit of like there's almost like a bit of a Trojan horse element with Disburden Disciple, because it starts off, it's very sensual. There are these kind of like alternative rock poppy elements to it. Some of it's quite funky as well. But I also notice, the more I listen to the album, the more I think about the lyrics, I feel like there are certain dichotomies in it. There is sensuality, and, sort of maybe in a way as a contrast to this statement of Anhedoniac of a failure to experience pleasure. To me, Disburden Disciple is kind of a recognition of pleasure and sensuality and eroticism, but a recognition that it's bound up with pain.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a line about, vulnerability, opening yourself up, and the price that you pay for that connection is the ability to inflict and receive pain. So yes, you're absolutely right about that. And so, but yeah, Bound was deliberately funky, and then moving on to kind of a reference to 70s rock at the end. And there's even a reference to the Stones there with the backing vocals that I'm doing there.
Ah, okay.
And so but Dear 666, that's that's one of the tracks that I did along with Scarification, about what is popularly known, I guess, as the Stockholm Syndrome. So that's where you stay involved in a relationship or a situation where you're in love with your captor. You fall in love with your victimizer. And so that's a problem for a lot of people, male and female. So those tracks kind of touch on that, and then both of them are realizing that you put yourself in that position and you can get yourself out. So with Scarification, the only one who's responsible for this is me. So and then Forgive is basically about a marriage, and Scorpion is a very sexy, sensual track. And that is that's that's about
sexy and
erotic.
sensual, but also seems to involve death as well.
Well, it's
or the potential
erotic.
for death. It's like seducing your lover, but also potentially killing them.
Yes, and I think that's possibly as erotic as I've ever gotten, and so you're absolutely correct. And the salt water dripping on the disintegrating curtain. So that's open to how you want to interpret that. And for me, that's talking about tears and crying. So I think that so that, and then Under, of course, was written about the AIDS crisis and a friend who died, and so that was about some trauma with the illness of a friend. And Seance is, of course, about a seance and about being accused of something, and when you so I think your assessment is pretty good. Dear 666 is definitely referencing blues. My voice and the way I'm singing is referencing like a blues vernacular. So I was really happy with being able to do the different voices on this, because obviously Anhedoniac really has a range of voices, characters. And I mean, it's pretty much pulling out all the stops of what I could, at the time was doing with my voice.
Yeah.
With Mississippi was, with the sound of the crickets in the background, and that was referencing, I was born there, so that was referencing, memories of Mississippi when I was a little kid, and I think that on this album I'm also doing a lot of different voices and different I guess theater settings, So I think that this was. But ultimately, this thing, when I originally had it, I was thanking one of the doctors who performed surgery on me. And I didn't add that to the vinyl reissue. but I think that, ultimately it kind of came to a head and conceptualized with me after the incident in Israel. It kind of made everything come full circle about the pain involved in intimacy.
So on that, I wanted to ask you about how you ended up in Israel and partly recording the album there. So this accident that you talked about and this physical trauma, where does that tie into in the timeline of the making of the album?
Oh, I think possibly within a year of the thing finally being finished.
Also, it was after you'd finished the recording.
Well, when I was there, I recorded sounds that went on to Pure War.
Okay, but not the actual vocals. Were all the vocals previously recorded before you were in Israel?
Yes, the actual musicality and the vocal came after that trip. That's right.
Right. Okay. So what kind of, apart from this physical trauma, which must have had a huge impact on you, why did you go to Israel, and what kind of impact do you think being surrounded in that culture had on you and on your music?
I was invited, and I went over there to work and to record. And in the same way, like I did a trip to Japan, where I was invited to come record and do concerts. And so it was just seemed like, something that would be enlightening and challenging. And so that was why I accepted it and went over there. It was a tremendous learning experience, and I'm very grateful for it. And it was kind of amazing to specifically to live inside Damascus Gate. I was there for 6 weeks, and it was very profound to realize that you were within 5 minutes of important locations for the three of the great religions, of the entire
absolutely.
world. And so I spent time with all three of those places. I went to the Wall, I went to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, I went to the Dome of the Rock. I really kind of immersed myself into to that side of things, and it was just incredible. I'll never forget going down the steps into the gate first time, and it was as an American with no experience in that part of the world yet, I was like pinching myself with the beauty, because it felt like I was in a film set. I mean, it was hard to believe, like, this is real, and these people are real, and this is all the reality of it, the life of it, the vibrance of it was absolutely stimulating and enlightening. I mean, it was just beautiful. It was so intense and so wonderful. I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to go home. I just wanted to stay there forever.
Yeah. I've never been to Israel, but I can imagine, like you say, being at that sort of cross section that has so much historical importance would be an incredibly powerful experience.
Yeah, and then tour groups would be coming through. It was just, but yeah, no, it was interesting to go to all those. And then I went to Bethlehem, and I mean, I went to different places. I went to Ramallah. I went to different places, and it was informative and educational. And there's nothing like getting education firsthand instead of seeing it on the news or reading about it in books.
Absolutely, yeah. You touched on the fact that you're from Mississippi, and I was curious to ask you about your name, because everyone, I would say, fans of yours, we all know you as Jarboe, but your full name sounds French to me. What is the origin of your family name?
The accent that I pronounce it, is the accent is on the second syllable, so it's Jarboe, but no one ever pronounces it correctly. That's fine. Yeah, they were one of the first people that came over was I think he was a lieutenant or something in the French military, who was one of the settlers who came over, and so it goes back to the south of France. Yeah.
And growing up, did you have older relatives that were French speaking?
No, by the time that I was born, I think that those people weren't alive, but I think that some of the food and things like that were still there.
Okay.
And then, of course, my childhood, a lot of my childhood, we made trips to New Orleans because my mother and grandmother were born there, and also my grandparents were married there, and so there's a connection with NOLA, and I think that is quite a European city, really, and that the street performers, I've talked about this before, the street performers and all that, it made a big impression on me as a wide-eyed kid. So that probably had a lot to do with being attracted to performance.
Yes. Well, I've heard you mention before that when you first were exposed to the music of Swans, that you thought of them as being like performance art. And yes. So to that point, I wonder, within your solo career, has that also been something that you've been interested in, not really necessarily thinking of yourself as being just a singer or a musician, but actually a performance artist?
This keeps changing and morphing. I think for a long time, I kind of felt like I was, like a service provider in a way, because I would bring about a type of catharsis in the audience. I did one tour where in Riga, Latvia, where the audience was all on the floor and they started, I looked at them and all of them had tears coming down their face. So, that to be that extremely effective was not necessarily the goal. But yeah, I think, you just are try to be as honest and real as you possibly can. And so the effect that you have on the audience is, is if you're sincere and you connect, and I think, for sure, the Swans, for sure, I thought that's what I thought. And when I first met the band and was talking with Michael Jura, I did say that that was what I thought they were. And he, in his typical fashion, said, well, I think we're a rock band, and And of course, that is what he would say, of course. He had to
Yeah.
diffuse it. But then, there were times, especially at the end there in the group, when he would tell me to tone it down. I was being too theatrical when I would take center stage and do vocals. And then I had to reflect on that moment, because I remember when I was behind the keyboard, we had our extremely harsh tours. I can remember when he would be stripped down. There's photographic documentation of it. He would be completely nude and stripped down and being very theatrical. So I was kind of confused as to how he defined theater and how he defined what the line was where you would stop. So I continue to think that there's a lot of I saw the show, the Swans show in April last year, and he was doing, a lot of theatrical things there, like slapping his face really harsh repeatedly, like basically knocking himself out with his own hands, and then slapping his butt, like really vigorously. So I mean, to me, those gestures are coming from a type of to me, a type of a theater. And I know who he's referencing when he does that. The Kipper twins, I think is what they were called, and they were a performance group, two guys, and they would like hit each other with their fists, and even with their own fists. So I think that how you define theatrical performance, it's just kind of it's just such a wide range. It's a big subject,
No, it's a fair point. And I'm sure there's not a firm line between where just straight musical expression can become performance art. I'm sure there's a lot of overlap between the two.
The thing that I do too in my work is I'm basically involved in like an architect, like an engineer with minute sound files and illusory. For example, that album took a year to make, and it was just incredibly intense. And using live recordings and then manipulating and putting them into an environment. And so the problem with when you are that way with your work is performing it live becomes a bit of a challenge, because to really do it, it would require basically an orchestra performance. And so it's not, I did tours where it was just me and guitar or me and piano. And I think that to really represent what I do is involving a lot of, computer action. And so that's still a challenge, because I know the agency wants me to get out there and tour alone. And I would be happy to do that if I played acoustic guitar and just played keyboard and sang, but I don't do that. I do something really extreme. So it's something I'm going to have to figure out how to present.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum from the sonic aspects of what you do. I wanted to ask you about a recording that I've never heard anyone else ask you about, My Delicate Beast, which is actually one of my favorite albums of yours. And I bought this from your website some time ago, and the version that I bought was just listed as side A and side B. So at the time when I listened through this, I thought, I have no idea what these things are called. But as far as I know, this is the only recording you've released which is all straight spoken word. From what I remember, there's no actual music on this. And one of the tracks, if I've got the name right, that I found the most powerful on it, I think it comes right towards the end of the second side. I guess it's Southern Hospitality. You tell this very macabre story. And I've been fascinated ever since I heard it the first time to know how much this is based on reality and how much this is a made up story.
Well, that entire project was recorded in my closet. So I was just kind of whispering and kind of speaking inside the closet with the door closed. I think I recorded that on a cassette, as I recall, a cassette recorder. So it's very, very, very raw. But I mean, I don't know. You mean in particular? What do you mean? Do you mean the graphic nature of it, or do you mean
the story of going into this house and finding something sinister in the basement? It was kind of. I thought, how much was this based on real experience?
Probably at the time, that was when we were both, Michael and I were both reading about, serial killers. And we had a friend who was doing artwork based on this. And so I think that it was definitely imaginary, definitely fiction.
Okay.
But I tried to kind of liven it up with references to real things, you know.
That makes a lot of sense, because I think that was the
Yeah.
thing for me, is like, I thought this feels like some of these comments just seem very kind of casual and real, but that makes a lot of sense that you kind of peppered those in there to make it feel more realistic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you know, the title, My Delicate Beast, that comes from a note that Michael left for me, and it said, will you go for a walk with me, my delicate beast? And so it was a little note he wrote and left on the table. So I thought that's really cool, my delicate beast.
Another phase of your solo career I'd like to ask you about is
Okay.
the Men album.
Mm-hmm.
And in particular, so you have a range of really interesting collaborations on that album, but I wanted to ask you about your collaboration with Blixa Bargeld from Einstürzen und Neubauten,
Mm-hmm.
because I gather that before you made the decision to interview Michael Gira and ultimately you joined Swans, that you had this idea that you would either go and introduce yourself to Swans or Einstürzen und Neubauten. So I'm curious
Mm-hmm.
to know what fascinated you with the latter, and whether or not Blixa Bargeld knew that story when you collaborated with him.
I don't think he knows that. I don't think I've ever told him that. But I was listening to them a lot during those days before I moved to New York, and it seemed to me there was a resonance there with what they were doing, and then also the Filth album from Swans, because I
Mm,
hadn't heard anything quite like it before, either of
yeah.
those bands. And but yeah, no, I was very interested. I was going to at least attempt some kind of input or some kind of collaboration. And so I was going to go to Berlin, and I was going to, if it didn't work out with New York. So yeah, so those are the two projects I was most interested in at the time. Of course, I was also listening to SPK and a bunch of other groups, but those two were the most important at the time.
Well, incidentally, I also, talking of different inspirations, I have to thank you for having introduced me to Bluebeard's Castle and Popol Vuh, because you did a piece for, I forget if it was The Guardian or The Observer a little while ago, where you listed various important records. And I'd never actually listened to Popol Vuh before. And it was because of that article that I
Oh,
listened to them, and I really fell in love with them. So thank you for that.
yeah, yeah, no, you can hear you can hear some of the influence in some of the Swans music. It came from the Popol Vuh with the acoustic and guitar, and so I think that I
Mm.
brought these albums up to New York with me. I brought a number of albums, and but yeah, they were very important to me too. Popol Vuh, correct.
So going back to Disburden Disciple, I wanted to ask you something else, which is sort of partly to do with my observations of different themes and imagery in the album. I noticed that there are a number of different references to fire, and so that would seem to potentially suggest, sort of destruction and rebirth. I wonder,
Mm-hmm.
if was there an aspect of catharsis to Disburden Disciple, that this was sort of, in a sense, being creatively reborn?
Yes, definitely, for sure. And catharsis due to extreme change in
Mm,
everything that was happening in my life at the time. And that's again why, the title, that's again the reason for and to be a disciple of constantly trying to undo the damage and to move forward. And there was a lot of I guess conflict going on in my life during during this. And so yeah, for sure, you're absolutely right. The fire is deliberate. Yeah.
And going back to some of what you were talking about with your performances, so having come from being in Swans, where this was very much Michael Gira's vision, and he might, have certain comments about different people's performances. Did that take you some time to sort of get the confidence or the sort of understanding of what your own creative voice and vision was going to be, both on record and on stage, after that, once you left Swans?
The confidence came pretty early on, and I was allowed to, run with it, as it were, in the studio and on stage to a degree. But I think with the input of like telling other musicians what to play and being involved in the arrangements and this kind of thing, it was definitely an excellent learning experience, and the privilege of working in these studios, these big studios with reel-to-reel tape and all that. That was something that a lot of, most artists don't even do anymore. I mean, so I think that this was all education. But I would say the last tour for me with I Crawled, that really opened up the gate with what I could do in terms of just one song, to do all those multiple voices.
Yeah.
And because it was at the time going to be the last tour, I kind of did an homage at the end with my voice going into the sub voice, the subgenre, the death metal voice, that. And all this was done, and then I had the lost girl, and so it's a whole tableau of it's basically a gut-wrenching tableau. And that was I consider that to be my greatest vocal performance the entire time I was in Swans. And I think that, finding the voice, say doing a cover version of Black Eyed Dog and finding that voice, and When She Breathes, finding that voice, both of them are referencing Southern vernacular. And in the studio, it would be interesting. Like, I would bring out these voices, and then the good thing about working with Michael but he would say, take it further, take it even further. And so, like, for example, when we did Level Tear Us Apart, the second verse was great. Now go back and do the first verse in that same place. And so that kind of push, is very important. And it helps you to kind of find what you can do and to find your own voice. And I'm actually grateful for that push, because that's really important for any performer, to have the director, the producer, the person who's pushing you to do your best.
Yeah, and maybe pushing you into areas that you either wouldn't have thought of or you wouldn't thought yourself capable of.
Yeah, and then of course there's a lot of conflict too. I mean, you figure at a certain point, you know what you can do, and you know who you are, and what you're able to do, and then to be given direction at that stage when you've been doing it for years, that used to be something that would kind of bristle me a little bit, because I'd be like, I know exactly how to deliver this.
Yeah.
So the freeing thing about being your own critic is knowing how far to take it, and then when to take it back.
Yeah.
So now I know when something needs to be rolled back, and so I know with Illusory, with the version of Man of Hate that I did on there, one of the reviewers commented on how it was just using a voice with no effects whatsoever. And so, yes, that was the point. They got it. It was just being completely real, completely, nothing EQ, just completely raw out of the gate.
Yeah.
And so that kind of drove home that this was not being theater. This was making a real commentary on the topic. And that person changes from time to time. And when we performed that in 2022, P. Emerson Williams and I, on the tour, we did that track. Am I getting pop-ups? We did that track.
Not on my screen, so it's all good.
Okay. And it was very extreme, because at the end it's, I'm the man of hate. And so it's like, we are all the man of hate. We've enabled this dictator. So so that's an example of when when to roll it back, and to just be completely conversational with your voice.
Yeah. Well, on that,
it's kind of technical.
No, it's fascinating. On that topic of your different voices, because that is one of the things that you are, I would say, most well known for, is the variety of different voices that you have, and the range that, like you mentioned, with I Crawl, even within one song, within one performance. Was there anything in particular, you mentioned that in Anhedoniac that had some of your most difficult, some of your most extreme performances within Disburden Disciple, because there is still, like I say, within, even individual tracks, some quite sharp variety of your performances. Was there anything there that was particularly challenging from either a technical or an emotional point of view in terms of the delivery?
Probably of all of those, Kiss of Life is referencing deliberately a kind of a goth world, a gothic world.
Mm.
So that that was using a voice in particular for that genre. And but in terms of also, I would say scarification. We did a show in New York. We also performed it in Atlanta and in Chicago, and so we did scarification. And that ending, where it's basically a scream. So that was probably the most gut wrenching of all the vocals on the album, Scarification.
Yeah, okay, that does make a lot of sense. I was wondering, kind of in the opposite direction from what you were saying about Illusory and that being completely raw and not you actually embodying another character. You do have on the other side projects like Mahakali and Durga and Her Smile of Radiant Vengeance, where I think you are actually overtly embodying or channeling different figures, character spirits, if any of those are the right words. So I'm curious to know about this interest that you have in these kinds of creative performances.
Well, that started, the Mahakali thing, that started for me as a commentary on environmental destruction, global upheaval. And so everything was a metaphor for that. So for me, the choice of the Kali figure was the creator destroyer. So it comes to a head there with Overthrown. And it's interesting because there's a reference there with Blixa and the Anhedoniac and Feral, which Blixa did, in that I wanted a rock star to do the voice of madness. And so I asked some people that I knew in that genre, and not in the rock god genre, but in the rock genre. And they said, they mentioned Phil Anselmo. And so interesting backstory with my colleague was when I talked with him on the phone and to work on Mahakali. I wanted him to do Overthrown with no effects on his voice and to be very raw and not metal in any way. And I told him that I'd wanted him to do the voice of madness that Blixa did on Feral, and he had said, "Oh well, I would have done it, in a heartbeat if you had asked me." And the problem at the time was getting a hold of him.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Reaching out to him. I had no line to get to him. So it was interesting how he winds up doing the Overthrown, and he did a great job on that. So, but yeah, so that was for sure channeling, but channeling in my mind the destruction, the global destruction, the environmental upheaval of the entire planet. That was the idea for me.
Right. Okay. And Durga?
Well, I started off on this trail of these Hindu goddesses, so that they kind of are related, because of the connection as being the mother of the daughter, and so that's basically what led to that.
And this is another. Do you have time for a couple more questions?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Great. This is another sort of incidental question, but I was listening to you being interviewed by Conan Neutron, who I've also interviewed. I think, I don't remember how recent it was. Maybe it was last year or the year before. Conan Neutron's Protonic Reversal was the podcast.
Okay.
But this is a story that you've probably told to other people, but you were talking about how prior to collaborating with Neurosis, there was this one moment where you were driving your truck around and one of their tracks came on the radio, and you mentioned something about it being a track with female vocals, and I was just curious to know whether that was Raise the Stray from Enemy of the Sun, if you can remember what the track was.
I'm thinking that if the voice is on there, I'm pretty sure it may have been Chris Forrest. I don't know, but singing, but I don't remember. But that sounds right.
Okay,
it sounds like it was. But yeah, I heard it on the radio, and the voices, the female vocals, with just the music, it was something that I immediately resonated with, and I told Michael about it, and so we went to see them perform, and that was how that friendship began, was me hearing their song on the radio.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to have that sort of powerful experience. And then you get to meet the people, and then you get to collaborate with them and perform.
Oh
So
yeah, I loved working with them on the album, and then we did 6 shows together, and I loved every second of it.
yeah,
It
yeah,
was really great.
I've seen them play a couple of times live, and it was incredibly powerful. Which I have to say also as well, seeing you perform live was incredibly powerful too. The first time I saw you was in London when you were playing with, I guess it was like a joint headline tour maybe with Esoteric. But when I saw the show, you went on first and they were on afterwards. It was actually for the Mahakali tour. And that was my first time to see you on stage. And I remember it was one of those experiences where I was struck by your energy. You know, there's been a few different people that I've seen, like of all random associations, Lemmy from Motorhead. I remember when I saw Motorhead, I thought like, wow, this person has some kind of incredible energy. And I felt, I'm not saying you had the same energy as Lemmy, but somehow there was a there was a power just to seeing you on stage that I really felt. And I saw you again, although saw is perhaps the wrong word. I went to listen to you in Prague a few years ago. You were playing somewhere around about Hrchanska. I can't remember exactly what year it was, but it would have been around about 2019, 18, I want to say. And it was a little venue downstairs, but there were so many people there that I basically...
Oh, I remember that. I
I
remember
couldn't
that
see you at
place.
all, but it sounded great.
I remember that show. That was the tour where somehow I had the idea that I would go out into the audience every single show.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I would, at the end, it kind of becomes like a waltz, the music. And so I would go out into the audience and I would hug every single person. But I would look down with my hands down and look up at them to see if it seemed go away or or I'm
Yeah.
open to this. So I did kind of invite, and sometimes it was a nebulous, like I didn't know, couldn't read it correctly. And that particular show, I misread someone, and they were near the back, and I misread, and they were a metal looking person, metal looking man, heavy metal, and somehow I thought he was saying this is okay. So I did, and his whole body was just trembling in a kind of a rage.
Wow.
And it freaked me out, and I was like, okay. And then that was when I decided not to do that again.
That's understandable.
I thought, wow, like you're kind of being presumptuous here. You're imposing on people that they don't want their space to be invaded by you. But yeah, that happened at that particular concert.
That's really interesting. Like, I think I've heard you mention that story before and I'd forgotten about it, but I was actually going to ask you about another performer who I had thought may have been influenced by you. And now that you've reminded me of that story, I think it even more. Kristen Hayter in her Lingua Ignota project, I saw her play a couple of years ago. And I think this was a feature of her shows very commonly, that she would go out at a certain point. And I think for her, it wasn't so much that she would really be sort of confronting the audience, but she basically put herself in this very vulnerable position right in the center of the crowd. And it would be a sort of kind of a personal insular thing, but she'd put herself there with everyone around her. And I had wondered whether that was something that she may have been inspired by from seeing you. I don't know where you got that idea from yourself.
To me, it was just, again, about vulnerability and trying to connect with the people. The tour, well, I did it in many, many tours, but the 2005, I think it was, tour, that, which is around the time of the Moon album, that one I remember in particular, the London show. That was an incredible show. It had, oh my God, it had Justin Broadwick performed as final, and members of Faust were there, and it was really kind of an incredible evening. And so we did the track Sinner, and so that one is, of course, Sinner is about a prostitute in the red light district getting murdered, and so this song, I would go out into the room, and so I went and so it was interesting because I decided I really liked using the PA as a monitor, and so because you get the full sound that the audience is hearing. And so I went out and people were gathered around, and for that particular performance, I would take the mic cord and I would wrap it around my neck and literally go down on my back with my knees underneath me and choke myself, because at the end of the song, she's going choke, 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 and so I don't know who saw me, but I did that many times, going right out into the room and doing the vocals, and the band would be on stage as the stars up there on the stage, and I would be down there on the floor, and that was really enjoyable. I loved performing that way, and no one ever hurt me. People would make a space, and would be standing around, and so I mean, I did that for years. So I don't know if who saw it or who it could have influenced, but that was part of what I did for a very, very long time.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I guess I'm pretty sure if you were doing that for a long time, that influence would have made its little waves around the creative world. So, thinking about the release of the reissue of Disburden Disciple, I've heard you talk with other people in the last couple of years about the disruption caused by COVID, having to cancel tours. What is the current situation in terms of what you've got lined up for shows in support of this record, or for, whatever other record you're going to put out in the next 6 months? Because it does seem to be every few months there's another Jarboe release.
Well, Sightings is complete, and that is last I heard about that was they'd received the test pressing, and Sightings is highly experimental and highly, and that has a star on it, and that star is a red-eyed vireo that I fell in love with. This little guy, he started performing for me on a branch off of the deck, and I would go out every day, and he would literally perform for me for 45 minutes a day. And this went on for a very long time. So I decided to record this bird, and I put him on, and I was very happy with the way the recording came out. And so I put him on the album.
I love it.
And so I don't know how that's going to go down with anybody, but he's just so, the red vireo has the biggest vocabulary of any bird in the world, and it's like improv jazz. He never repeats, and experts have some people have actually, you can research it, they've documented it. I don't know how they meticulously sat down and notated how many, but hundreds of thousands in one performance, one afternoon, and so this is what intrigued me about it, was the fact that this was beyond musical. This guy, and he's small, he's very small. So he's on the cover of the album too. And Phil Anselmo, who is currently a member of Swans, he did the artwork, and he actually drew a beautiful red-eyed vireo. So that's on this painting actually is on the front of the album. So that's done. But I would have been out there probably this spring, except for the fact that I had to have a carpal tunnel release surgery on my wrist. And so that's healed now. So I can, now that my wrist is back in action, I can.
I see. Okay.
I can. Yeah. So, but again, trying to figure out what kind of thing I want to present, because in 2022, when we went out with the lutist Joseph van Lysum, Joseph was wonderful to tour with, and so on that particular show, I was using a MacBook Pro, and then Peter was on electric guitar with effects, and so the entire performance I was sitting behind the computer. And then I did the show in Texas at a festival, and I had Thor Harris, who was in Swans, and he played various instruments for the show along with Peter. And then I was able to open the set by standing up and facing the audience, because they were able to carry enough musically. So again, it's a matter of finding out, do I want to go out there with a guitarist or a piano player, or how I'm going to present the next one. But yeah, I do want to do that a number of more times before I can't do it again. And I want to see what it's like now with the climate in Europe for Americans, and and then coming back into the country and all that, because things have changed with the current administration. And so but I'm pretty fearless. So I think that
I believe it. Well,
So yeah, so I love more than anything. I love performing in Europe, and I love performing in churches and alternative venues like art galleries and just unusual spaces. And there are a lot of those in Europe, and there aren't that many in this country. So this country that is very different, touring wise. To me, it's just not as interesting. And I think I really am not interested in rock clubs anymore. So I think that one of the great things about the 2022 tour was we did play very interesting old theaters, like former theaters that turned into concert venues. And we played a wonderful church in France. And so I think that, if I can get into places like that, then I'll be very, very happy.
Well, if I can speak for the whole of Europe, then I would say that we would love to have you back as soon as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. And hopefully, as long as people understand that you don't necessarily agree with things. So I think that
I think everyone's going to understand that for sure. Message understood. So in general, for people to keep track of the shows that you've got coming up and releases, etc., is it best for people to go to Living Jarboe, sign up for the newsletter there? Are you also putting updates on, I don't know, Instagram or Blue Sky, things like that?
I would, for sure. In the past, I think they were put up on the site as well as I have two Facebook pages, one the so-called band page, business page, put them up there. But and then of course I think you can add them to some of these sites, like Spotify or some of these sites. That's right. You can add them to that. I don't know, but yeah. So we'll see. But again, I definitely am going to be facing that again and looking forward to it for sure. And it would be great to leave this country for a while too.
I can understand that. Well, I will be looking out for Jarboe to see when you are next in my area, hopefully in the same country or at least in a country relatively near to me. I mean, that's one thing about living in Europe is that, to get from the UK to Germany or to get from the UK to France is actually, relatively speaking, it's not that far away.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And I have friends there. But I focus mostly on Europe. Now, I did play the Dark Mofo twice in Tasmania, and that was also something I absolutely loved. And that was another place I could have moved to. I absolutely loved Hobart. So
yeah, well, now you've just reminded me that you picked out at the very beginning that you recognized I was originally from Australia. So yeah, that's just come back to me.
Yeah, Hobart is an incredible place, and the Museum of Old and New Art, Mona, that is mind blowing. Have you been to the Mona?
I have, yes.
Yeah, oh my God. So I love it there. Absolutely love it there.
Yeah, I was actually just back over in Australia just very recently because most of my relatives still live over there. So yeah, Albert Tucker, for what it's worth, he is the painter that I have fallen in love with. So that would be if I can offer you one suggestion of something to check out, have a look at the art of Albert Tucker.
Okay, let me write that down. I will.
And if I can ask in return, because I noticed I decided for no particular reason this year I was going to try and read a book a week. And I've been managing to do it so far. And then I incidentally noticed that you mentioned you'd read like 100 books in the past year. And I thought, wow, well, my achievement seems less impressive now. So could you recommend me a book?
Well, it depends on what subject you're interested in. I mean, I focus on I like biographies, autobiographies, and I read a lot of.
I like autobiographies too.
I read a lot of Buddhist books, Tibetan Buddhist books. I'm currently reading a book, Voice for the Voices, Voice for the Voiceless, and that's by the Dalai Lama. So I definitely recommend that. And it talks about the political situation and how that all unfolded with China invading Tibet. So that's a book that I'm really enjoying right now.
Okay. It doesn't sound necessarily like the easiest bedtime reading, but it does sound worthwhile.
Well, I've read both volumes of the books about Paul McCartney. And so that's going to series. It's like eras of his life, the early era, the mid era. So that's also great because what's good about those is that it talks in depth about his how he gets certain effects on the studio, and how and it's really interesting. It's very interesting. I didn't realize it would be as interesting, and it is. It's fascinating. So yeah, the two latest books about Paul McCartney are something I've really enjoyed. I mean, it's very diverse what I what I absorb. It's very diverse.
Yeah.
And then you figure I post images of some of the physical books, but then I have a massive digital library as well. So I don't post images of those because I don't quite know how to do it, but without doing a screenshot and a composite,
Yeah.
So I'm getting ready to post new ones. But I was very interested in fiction, stories. And so now it's primarily, stories about Buddhism or books about Buddhism or meditation and history and books about musicians and, things like that. And so it's really all over the map, but I mean, it's very easy to read 100 books in a year. You just have to focus and do it every day, just like exercising or meditation. You just have a time slot and you read. And I like to do it right before I go to sleep because it puts my mind into that world.
Yeah, part of the reason why I started doing it is because I wanted to find a way to detach myself from the phone and the internet. And I thought this is going to be a good, productive way of doing that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's very unhealthy to be focused on, Instagram and all this stuff, and just sitting around staring at the screen isn't necessarily a good thing. But yeah, no, I like the physicality of the book.
Oh, me too.
And actually more than the digital books.
100%. Yeah, I used to work in book selling, so I have particularly like.
Oh, really?
Yeah, for years.
Oh,
so
wow.
I have a strong feeling about physical books.
Yeah, no, it's something about the holding it in your hand,
100%. Absolutely.
And plus, you can, in terms of the environment, you can get them from the library if you want, or you can, you can buy them used, or you can buy them and donate them, But me,
100%.
I had to buy new bookcases because now this is years ago. I donated. I'm not joking when I say thousands of books. I donated them to Books for a Better World. So now here I am acquiring them again. So I guess and some of the books I donated,
coming back to you again.
Buying them again.
Well, it's it's a circle of joy going around the universe. So, well, look, I'm not going to shy away from voice of the voiceless, voice for the voiceless. I forgot exactly the name, the Dalai Lama book you mentioned.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's really good. I recommend that. Yeah,
I will check it out.
I wanted to mention we did a I don't know what year this was. MTV Europe came to our show in Edinburgh, and they interviewed us, as I recall, like before the show. And I had on a shirt that was a Tibet shirt, and so it was kind of weird because I was asked to be part of the interview, and yet the interviewer didn't ask me anything. So after a while, I was starting to get kind of angry. I was like, why am I sitting here? Because all the questions were directed to Michael. And so at the end, they're like, anything else you want to say? And so at that point, I stood up and I showed my shirt and I said, yes, China out of Tibet. And they edited that out for Europe. Really?
Yeah.
So that was like my moment of being an activist.
Yeah. Well, I would like to say that's not going to be edited out of this interview. Jarboe, thank you so much. I didn't mean to keep you for so long, but I really appreciate your time. Thank you. It's been a thrill to talk with you.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much.
So all the best until I next see you in Europe.
Okay, great. All right. Okay, bye.
Thanks. Bye.